Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I have another video for you guys, another one that was requested, and this is another video from Clyde. Now we already reacted to a bunch of videos from Clyde when it comes to, let's say, the main character of Ichigo Kurosaki. So this one is going to be focusing on, in my opinion, probably one of the most underrated characters in all of Bleach, and one of my absolute favorite characters, that being Coyote Stark. I absolutely love this character, and I really wish we could have seen more of them in the actual story. But I'm looking forward to hearing what Clyde says and whether or not apparently Coyote Stark really was the strongest Espada. So let's go ahead and watch this video.
Almost every major shonen manga or anime has the group. A group of villains that are either a main source of conflict for the main character and cast.
Okay, just have to pause every now and then because, oh boy.
Or they linger around the story and in most cases tend to contain characters that we as readers and
Just pause. There we go.
watchers actually end up liking more than the main cast themselves. In Bleach, this group is called the Espada. And let me tell you that trying to thoroughly explain these individuals' powers correctly, and especially how they rank, even though they have their allocated numbers on their bodies which indicate their linear rank and power amongst one another, it's not only more complicated than this, but very far from the truth. In today's video, I'm going to focus on one of the most popular, underutilized, underrated in many aspects, and one of the strongest Espada, Coyote Stark. As always, if you're a fan of Bleach, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like on the video, follow my Twitch in the description, and enjoy. The more you support my channel, the more I'll be able to make in-depth character videos like this for when the Bleach anime returns. Trust me, I have some good videos up my sleeve, and I haven't even touched the good topics yet. Stark actually represents a few of Mr. Kubo's passions that are actually outside of doing manga and anime related things. For one, Kubo always wanted to implement guns into Bleach.
Okay, sorry, it's just I can hear the music from the anime and
But due to the way the story was originally set out, and especially the theme of it, it was kinda hard to get a Shinigami and then swap their Zanpakuto out with an AK-47. Part of this passion, or an interest in guns,
what's this way? Zombie power. Okay.
actually stems from Mr. Kubo's original manga, Zombie Powder, and the unique designs you constantly see for the Espada are inspired by Mr. Kubo's love for fashion. And this love for fashion has been showcased in things like interviews, the clothing that Mr. Kubo actually wears, and this is also seen for special coloured pages of the manga and other special material like, say, novels, data books, movie guides, etc. Coyote Stark to me always had a bit of a Wild West cowboy aesthetic feel to his character, along with his obvious name, the way he holsters his guns, his boots, etc. He is without a doubt a very cool character and designed quite uniquely in the series, and when it was revealed he was ranked number 1 among the Espada, I don't think anyone had any issues with that when they first read or watched Bleach. But there is a big issue with the conventional rankings of the Espada in Bleach, mostly due to many things like Ulquiorra existing, who is the only Espada, other than arguably Yami's monkey second release form, to have a second resurrection. Obviously, this creates narrative implications that directly clash with the rankings originally presented to us readers and watchers. Not only this, but speaking of the aforementioned Monkey Man Yami, he also creates problems, considering that he is actually rank 0 and Stark is rank 1. Because of Yami and his rank of 0, the video could actually end right here, though it's much more complicated than that. Now, the reason I'm making this video is because Stark is genuinely one of the coolest characters in the series, and I wanted to get down to the absolute truth as to where he does objectively stand in terms of power in comparison to not just his fellow Espada, but also the world of Bleach and its other countless strong characters. So, I sat down, reread his fights in the series, got some databook pages translated from Japanese for this specific video, and I've come to an answer which I believe does him justice, but also clarifies some confusing subjects in Bleach. If you're a fan of Stark, don't forget to give this video a like. The first thing I want to delve into for this video is Stark's speed. Now, Stark actually has some really impressive speed feats, and speed feats that go into something about using Flash Step and Sonido that some Bleach fans may not be aware of. Stark is not only stated in the databook Mask to be one of the fastest members of the Espada, but could be consistently argued to be faster than Zombari in his release state, due to the fact that Stark is so good at using Sonido that he can actually use long distance Sonidos, which is something Yamamoto actually complimented Shunsui for being able to do when he flash stepped across the entire Soul Society to move Nanal in a single step. Now, I mentioned Zombari for a rather particular reason, and that's because in the data books, and from his very own mouth, it stated he has the fastest Sonido among the Espada. Though I'm personally of the belief that this only applies to his base form, just like Noyatora's braggadocious statement about having the hardest hero among all the Espada. Just for a second, imagine this in your head. If Ichigo in his holification right here was to charge up his hardest swing, who do you personally think could tank the attack better? Stark in his release form, or Noyatora in his release form?
I would say
One
Stark.
of the most notable speed feats from Stark, which I'm sure all you Bleach fans remember, is when he's able to blitz and steal Orihime from Ichigo and Kenpachi at the same time. Now granted, she was a little bit away from them, and they still were not fully healed from their previous battles. The fact is, he casually did this in his base form and was apologetic while doing it. This was something he very casually did. It's also an even more impressive feat when you consider he basically traveled from Aizen's tower across a distance which is comparable to a city or state in pretty much an instant, and then returned to Aizen with Orihime before Kenpachi and Ichigo could swing and stop him. During Stark's battle with Shunsui and Ukitake, he also shows an aptitude for being incredibly intelligent with his fight IQ, where he is able to bait Shunsui many times. He analyzes Ukitake's Shikai ability after only seeing it a few times, which even impresses Ukitake, and Stark was able to mislead Shunsui about the holstered gun theory, even though Shunsui was already suspicious of what Stark's guns could do. To further this point, Stark even fires a Sero with complete confidence he'll be able to avoid the follow-up attack just to see what Ukitake's Shikai does to confirm his theory. And he works out that the talismans actually change the pressure of the attack and the velocity, which he still avoids with no problem.
Which does speak to
He
his
also
intelligence.
avoids an instant follow-up attack from Shunsui, who was using ready techniques multiple times in battle when he tries to slash off his head during this exchange upon testing the theory of Ukitake's Shikai. Stark is also so attentive that he keeps a close eye on everything Shunsui and Ukitake does, as he is very suspicious of their slight changes in mannerism. When Stark first goes into his Resurrection, mid-talking to Lilynet, Shunsui throws his hat in front of Stark to create a diversion and attack him with absolutely zero honor, and Stark still avoids this easily. Shunsui clarifies what I said, stating he was actually trying to kill Stark in that one attack, but he avoided it easily. He then goes on to compliment his power and speed upon going into his release form. Stark also showed very good combat and speed feats when he is able to keep up with not just Shunsui and Ukitake, but also Rose and Love. Though there were a few times where he was blitzed and surprised, I will get into that later. Regardless, he's one of the fastest Espada, without a doubt, and one of the flashiest. Something very impressive about Stark that many people kind of forget about is that Stark was one of the only natural-born Arrancar to exist in Hueco Mundo. When Aizen found him, he was already in a humanoid-looking form at the time, and was so strong that hollows around him would just die from being within his vicinity. Aizen obviously recognized him as strong, and welcomed Stark to join him. After this, Aizen used the Hogyoku, gave him a Zanpakuto, a release form, and amps, just like he did with all of the other Espada.
And keep in mind, unlike a certain pathetic Hulk wannabe, he doesn't need some anger boost to be able to fight anyone. That this guy is just strong on his own. It's almost insane. And keep in mind, his is the only, like, his power was so strong it literally split itself into someone else. No one else was able to do that. I mean, think about that.
Release form and amps, just like he did with all of the other Espada. Stark was actually so strong that he split into two beings, himself and Lilynet. When he performs Resurrection, he fuses with her and she becomes the Akimbo guns you see in his release form. A pretty funny concept when you remember she can actually talk while in her gun forms, and Stark originally split himself into two because he was so lonely. as he would accidentally kill his friends with his spiritual pressure just by being around them. Now, I don't want to over-exaggerate the ability to kill hollows just from being around them, as it's not as if this makes him transcendent like Aizen, where he can affect even those who are above captain level, and we know that this isn't a mind-blowing feat from Stark because just by having so many captains in Karakura town during the war, hollows from miles away were dying, and none of the individuals there were using transcendent spiritual pressure. You could say Yamamoto, but he wasn't in his Shikai nor Bonkai at this specific moment, and he definitely was not flexing his spiritual pressure. Regardless, being a natural-born Arrancar and being this powerful is seriously wild, considering he just roamed around Hueco Mundo and vibed with Lilynet until he met Aizen. Side note, by the way, if Ukitake just killed Lilynet when he could've, does this mean that they could've defeated Stark much easier, as Stark wouldn't be able to do the fusion dance with her? Just an interesting side note. I mean, Shunsui was already fighting dirty, could have easily done that. When Stark goes into his release form, Los Lobos, he summons 2 Seto firing guns, and this is without a doubt the coolest aspect of his release form. Now, these 2 guns are special. One of them fires a more powerful Seto, but it fires at a rather slow rate. The other can fire like a machine gun. This technique is called, excuse my Spanish, Seto Matraleta, which translates to Submachine Gun Zero, or in Japanese, this translates to Infinite Ammunition Hollow Flash. Interestingly too, in the actual original version of the manga, the one which Viz didn't touch, it actually says that he can fire infinite Seros. In the databook Unmasked, this also gets clarified, where it states his high spiritual pressure allows him to shoot infinite Seros. Now, some people go a bit too far with this statement and think that because he can fire infinite Seros, this means he can destroy the solar system, galaxies, and even the universe.
I wouldn't put it like that.
Technically he could, but it would take millions to billions of years, considering how hard it already is to not only get people to agree with continental to planetary feats from characters at this point in the story, especially the higher tiers. But I'll be honest, I personally do not agree with this at all, considering the absolute size of the universe and how feats like this were implied to be a massive deal at the end of the story and not something that characters of Stark's tier are capable of doing at this point in the story. Firing infinite Seros is cool and not a feat that I would disagree to be possible. I mean, Ulquiorra could do Hiroshima episode 2 50 times over with no problem. But let me put it to you this way. If Momo had infinite spiritual pressure at her disposal, right? She's still the same power, but her spiritual pressure never runs out. She just has an infinite amount of spiritual pressure at her disposal. And someone said to you that this makes her universal.
No,
would you think that that's a normal thing to say?
No, I don't think so.
Or here's another example. You give a machine gun to a random dude. He has unlimited ammo in the magazine.
Okay, I see what he's going with this, yeah.
Or refilled. It just infinitely fires bullets, right? In theory, he could destroy a town with this, right?
Yeah, in
He'd just have to
theory.
keep shooting everything
But it
until
would take him an
vanishes to dust, right?
incredibly long time.
Just imagine how long that would take him to do, let alone destroy the universe. Regardless, Stark's guns are seriously really damn cool and easily one of the best designs out of all of the Espada when it comes to their resurrections. And it's pretty interesting to think that he can pretty much just spam his gun as if he's got like a modded weapon in Call of Duty or GTA. Because it...
Also, okay, this seems like a good time to mention this, guys. So from now on, this video is already 54 minutes long. So from now on, I'm not going to pause it. So if I have something to say, I'm just going to say it as the video is playing. Because if I pause it to, like I'm doing now, to say what I want to say, this video could go over the 1 hour mark. And I don't want that to happen. So... just thought I'd let you know from now on.
In the original Japanese manga and in the data books, it does say that he can fire it infinitely, so there you go.
Well,
also,
you go.
it's kind of annoying that Stark doesn't ever
although,
just
like I said, I don't take
right?
what the data books say kind of seriously because they tend to...
like, he doesn't just blatantly say that that's what the gun
they tend
fires,
to coincide with what's going on in the manga.
Kind of frustrating, but anywho, we would have to assume that the more powerful handgun Zero is something like the Oscuras. If it's like the Gromray Zero, I mean, when Grimjow fired it, it was such a big deal that it almost wiped out Los Noches by accident. Just a little side note, you know, it is what it is. Regardless, Shunsui being able to tank that Zero is very impressive and actually a bad thing for Stark scaling, especially when Shunsui says, no, you may have gotten stronger by releasing, but ordinary Zero won't ... Keyword here is ordinary Zero, implying singular Zeros from his gun, even in his release state, don't actually impress him, but the volume of being able to fire 1,000 in a second if he wants does impress him. We also know that this is consistent because the actual volume of Zeros is the thing that obviously bothers Shunsui, whereas he doesn't find the power impressive in 2 occasions and does take one to the back but still survives it, and he was off guard. Shunsui then returns to the battle and later starts using his Shikai techniques. So one of the biggest talking points in the battle between Stark and Shunsui/Ukitake is that, well, Shunsui was planning to use his Bankai in the battle, and this is true, he was going to use it. The issue that comes up when it comes to this topic is that just because he was going to use his Bankai doesn't mean the fight was going to be competitive, especially when it comes to how the Bankai actually works. It's actually perfectly suited to battle a character like Stark, as Lily Barrow only survived the Bankai because he can transform many times, regenerate, and had intangibility for the most part in their battle. And another point that is continuously brought up in relation to this battle is that Stark never tries in the fight. This is a common thing that you always hear. Oh, Stark wasn't being serious, Stark didn't go all out, Stark was fighting multiple opponents, we didn't get to see his full potential, etc. And as I'll further go into, this notion that Stark wasn't trying at all whatsoever is just blatantly false, as he does try many times to defeat his opponents, but almost all of them in these battles are actually relative to him in power, and can keep up with him even in 1v1 battles. Is he stronger than most of them? Absolutely, like there's no doubt about that, he's stronger than them, but the difference in power between them isn't as dominant as like when, say, Ulquiorra used his first Resurrection to almost behead Ichigo, and Ichigo was so much slower than him that the synapses in his brain couldn't fire quick enough to comprehend Ulquiorra throwing a second lance, all in the span of a single motion with one arm, being perceived by his eyes. From his perspective, he's seen one getting thrown. In actuality, Ulquiorra was so much stronger and so much faster that he was throwing 2. A few of the biggest things which actually downplay Stark's power is a couple of things I found upon rereading the manga and the data books. For starters, Stark actually has a lot of trouble with Shunsui Ukitake, and when he fights Rose and Love, he says some particular things that downplay his own power a lot, compared to feats shown by, say, Ulquiorra and Yami in their respective battles. When Stark actually uses his strongest technique, which involves summoning the wolves in battle, interestingly enough, when I was rereading this fight, Kubo draws this really cool panel here where it shows Stark's mouth closed, then it shows a part of the page where it's open and he says, "Let's go Stark." Now, when I was trying to find the actual name of this technique, I couldn't really find it anywhere, not even on the wiki, but now to my understanding, I'm pretty sure this technique with the wolves is actually just called Stark or Stark Wolves. Not really a big deal, but something I actually wanted to highlight in this video because I found it quite cool that he himself refers to the technique as "Let's go Stark" when, you know, that's meant to be him. Pretty cool little nuance thing there from Mr. Kubo. But anywho, interestingly, Love and Rose initially refer to this technique as flames or Zero Flames. But then they also say that the technique is magic, and they say this more than once. Now, I'm not sure where Mr. Kubo was going with this and if he had further plans to delve into stuff like this, but essentially the reason why they probably interpret this technique in a weird way, like say magic, is because this technique isn't using spiritual pressure or normal attacks like say a Zero. It's actually a technique which is formed by that of the soul, and this is why Lilynet eventually disappears once they're all detonated. But the reason why this part of the battle is extremely relevant to the point I'm about to make is because Stark makes this really odd statement which sort of downplays his own power. He says, "It's not a Zero. A Zero alone wouldn't have been powerful enough to hurt people as strong as you." And he's saying this to Love and Rose, who get hit by the wolves and they survive the attack. Not only did he say that a Zero wouldn't be enough, but this implies that even the more powerful Zero from the other gun wouldn't be enough to finish them off, and even with his most powerful technique, they still survive point-blank explosions from the attacks, which they didn't know how to defend themselves against because of how weird the technique was. Dividing one's own soul, tearing it apart, each half treating the other as a partner, as a weapon. Those wolf bullets are Stark, but they are Lilynet too. They are the Primera Espada, Coyote Stark and Lilynet Gingerback's ability. And what's crazy about this is that during the holification training for Ichigo, there are multiple times where it's stated all of the Visors who are fighting the deformed Vasto Lorde are actually fighting seriously, and in Lisa's words, she believes that death will be the end result if they don't end things quickly. They are constantly surprised in battle with this thing, and this version of Ichigo and this version of his holo isn't even conscious at the time, because White is actually talking to Ichigo while this battle takes place, and it's absolutely nowhere near full power, as the badge is still unbroken and it's deformed, right? It's not even like the full Vasto Lorde, which we do see, and he passively gets much stronger through the Hueco Mundo invasion, and throughout all the battles he had since then, we once again actually do get to see the full power of the Vasto Lorde, one that isn't in this deformed state when it battles Ulquiorra. Now, as I sort of referenced before, when it comes to Stark's battles with, say, Shunsui and Ukitake at the same time, and all of the other people that he sort of battled, and the Sun Eater comparison that I made with Yamamoto's complement to Shunsui and Ukitake, there could be an attempt to scale Stark to Yamamoto by virtue of Shunsui and Ukitake fighting Yamamoto in the Soul Society arc. Though, again, what if Shunsui's Bankai amped his normal stats so much that he actually just one-shot Stark? The difference between the two, again, like I showed with the Ulquiorra and Ichigo example, it's not like it was heaven and earth in difference. Like, Shunsui was still very relative to Resurrection Stark. Just because he needed to go Bankai doesn't mean it would have been a competitive fight. We also know that Yamamoto had no difficulty fighting the both of them. Even them just standing in the presence of his flames was intimidating enough. And all three of them in this battle weren't going full power anyway, so that fight is irrelevant to this conversation. You could follow up and say, but Clyde, didn't you just say that Yamamoto was impressed by something that Shunsui and Ukitake did? Yeah, that's true, but it was more like a father patting his son on the head like, oh, that's really cool, Shunsui and Ukitake, you guys can use flash steps over a large distance, that looks really impressive. I still beat you here, even though you're
still nothing, you're still kids.
If you want an example of how drastically a fight could change with the transformation of Bankai, Ichigo and Byakuya were pretty neck to neck in battle, then look what happened when Byakuya went Bankai. Just an example of what could happen. Again, Shunsui was already relative to Stark, so if he went Bankai, all of his stats like his Kidos, his slashing ability, and then his access to all the different stages of his Bankai, it wouldn't have been a good thing for Stark. Just like the Yamamoto example, I've also seen people try to scale Stark all the way to the war with the Shunsui comparison, but if all of the Espada are on a linear scale with the evidence I provided, it literally makes zero difference to how he would rank unless he was specifically stated to have trained or gotten stronger in the time skip like Grimjow and Nell. We would also have to factor in things like a time skip power up because the series accelerated with the time skip and certain characters got stronger, especially the captains. How much did Shunsui train? Again, if Shunsui does go Bankai and one-shot Stark, yet Lilybaro could survive and keep up with it, how does that still scale him to the high tiers in the war? It honestly is kind of irrelevant to this video, but I do see this quite a lot, so I thought it would be worth mentioning. And one more other thing when it comes to the whole, Shunsui and Ukitake fought Yamamoto, in a 2v1. Therefore, Stark must be in the same echelon as Yamamoto when it comes to power. It's actually possible that Shunsui and Ukitake fighting together as a team against Stark would have led to them winning pretty comfortably because they didn't really get to do anything. Like, Wonderwise comes out of nowhere, their little plan begins, and he just, stabs Ukitake in the back without him realizing, so it's kind of like we got robbed of that potential battle, and Ukitake thinks that them two fighting together as a team is a substitute for Shunsui using his Bankai, so again, they probably could have won together, who knows. Yamamoto did complement their potential quite a lot in their battle, so Obviously, when they work together, they're going to be a massive problem. Also, there was a very specific question asked to Kubo many years ago, which is on the screen right now, and it essentially involved the question of, what if Shunsei's Bankai was, say, used against Aizen? And Kubo doesn't dismiss the idea of Aizen just confidently slapping him with one hand. He sort of implies that the Bankai itself is actually quite a big deal. Now, this is irrelevant to my personal feelings about Shunsei versus Aizen. I'm not even trying to bring that up, but it's a pretty interesting thing when you consider, like, yeah, that Bankai actually was pretty OP, huh? When
I still don't think he would have done
it. When diving into this specific part of the video, I want to be absolutely clear with all of you. I am not against the idea of Stark being the strongest Espada and being above both Ulquiorra and Yami, though the stuff I'm about to show you makes arguing this position incredibly hard, even as someone who is a fan of Stark. While rereading Bleach, I started to notice a lot of very nuanced things about the subplot of Aizen developing Ichigo's powers, and how it actually ended up influencing many other characters, their abilities, and their purpose in the story. For example, it's stated in the Bleach novel Spirits Are Forever With You that one of Aizen's contingency plans was to trap Kenpachi in Hueco Mundo until he had the power of immortality with the Hogyoku transformations. This was probably due to the fact that Aizen was aware of the potential Kenpachi actually had as the original Kenpachi, and especially with the title of Kenpachi and how much stronger he was in the past, and Aizen was being very safe around the idea that he may awaken those powers in a potential battle, just like how Kenpachi did when he battled Unohana in the manga. Does this mean that Aizen is scared of Kenpachi?
No.
Not necessarily.
No, I don't think
but
so.
his thought process to be safe around a potential
Yeah,
battle
it was
with
just
him is very important. If you recall that when Aizen left Hueco Mundo with
Okay, I'm sorry. I know I said I wasn't going to pause, but I'm just going to say this real quick. Personally, I don't think that Kenpachi would have really posed a threat to Aizen. I think it was because Aizen knew that if Kenpachi and Yamamoto were there, it would just give him more trouble than it's worth. And I think it was more so just out of convenience that he thought, okay, either Yamamoto or Kenpachi have to go to Hueco Mundo and keep them trapped there, because it would just make him executing his plans easier. I think it's mostly just done for convenience as opposed to actual fear of Kenpachi actually being able to kill him, because I personally don't think he would have been able to.
Gin and Tosen to go to Katakura Town to start the war with the Shinigami, he actually left Hueco Mundo entirely in Ulquiorra's hands, and said it was essentially his responsibility. Interestingly, Yami has actually stated in one of the Bleach data books that the only reason he spent time with Ulquiorra was because he actually respected his strength and didn't care for the others. In Bleach Unmasked, it's even stated that Yami felt despair when Ulquiorra died, showing supporting evidence of this unspoken respect the Espada No. 0 had for Ulquiorra. Funnily enough, Ichigo actually criticizes Yami for the statements that he makes about Ulquiorra and Grimmjow, especially in regards to their strength, but this is obviously a farce because at the time, Ulquiorra is dead. Anytime Ulquiorra was actually shown with Yami, Yami always respected what he said and listened to him. The stuff that he said to Ichigo was him being cocky because Ulquiorra was dead, but the data books actually tell us how he was actually feeling when Ulquiorra died, and it wasn't a positive thing. In fact, Yami even said that he had planned to go and help Ulquiorra above the canopy of Los Noches once he was done with his battle. By the way, just a side note, that would have been crazy. Like, imagine the Vasto Lorde fighting second release Yami and second release Ulquiorra. Now, again, if you don't consider Yami's transformation another resurrection just because he didn't verbally say second release, that's okay. But regardless of such, it would be a second form, so, you know, second release Ulquiorra, second release Yami fighting the Vasto Lorde. That would have been absolutely crazy. There are also statements in the data books that say word for word that Aizen sent Ulquiorra on more missions than any other Espada, and he was most likely his favorite Espada. This would explain why he allocated Ulquiorra and Yami to go and check on Ichigo's power. This would explain why he left Orihime as Ulquiorra's responsibility, and this would also explain why he left the responsibility of Hueco Mundo entirely in Ulquiorra's hands. Something else which actually stuck out to me in regards to Ulquiorra and why he feels very special among the Espada, even though he's technically only ranked, quotation marks, number 4, is that traditionally in Japan, the number 4 is seen as unlucky because it is sometimes pronounced shi, or she, which is the word for death. Sometimes, levels or rooms with 4 don't even exist in hospitals or hotels, particularly in the maternity section of a hospital. In fact, the room number 43 is avoided because it can literally mean stillbirth. Although this is a superstition among Japanese, it wouldn't surprise me if this was done on purpose in relation to giving Ulquiorra a fake number which revolves around death because of how nihilistic his character is. He kills Ichigo multiple times, and then secretly the entire series, he has stuff that the other Espada do not. Further indications of this would be that if Aizen actually does know of his second release form, that means he secretly gave Ulquiorra and Yami power-ups that the other Espada do not have. And this would make sense with how Aizen was constantly watching Ichigo's powers develop since he was a child, and in the anime version, he had a screen which let him watch the battles Ichigo partook in. Alongside this, it would make sense that Aizen had given Ulquiorra certain power-ups to help develop Ichigo's powers, as he had seen the original version of White, which was much weaker, and he also stated he knew that against Grimmjow he mastered Holification,
he would master Holification,
and against Ulquiorra with a dark silhouette of the second Resurrection, he states that he awakened something greater. In your battle with Ulquiorra, you seem to have gained an even greater power. And in the page before that, when he's analyzing Ichigo's spiritual pressure from the wound on his shoulder, he says, "So this is your spirit energy. Magnificent. You've really grown. Just as I envisioned." This wording from Aizen is very fascinating, because he is aware of the Vasto Lorde form which White can actually be in, is fascinating when compared to how he views the Espada in Katakura Town. Aizen basically mocks Baragun even until his death, and refers to Hallibal as disappointing, along with Stark realizing in his final moments that he doesn't care for them at all. But Yami and Ulquiorra, well, they are never viewed through this same lens, and were given secret missions along with secret power-ups and fake numbers that the other Espada do not have. If you remember at the start of the arc, Aizen actually sent Ulquiorra and Yami to the world of the living to scout out Ichigo's progress. Progress of power, which was a narrative point by Aizen.
Yeah, it meant something to him. Okay,
the war arc where there's a flashback called Everything But the Rain, where in these chapters he said he was interested in what would come of a hollow mixed with a Quincy. Keep in mind, these are polar opposite beings, yet White decided to seal itself inside of Misaki. In turn, this led to being Ichigo, a hybrid of pretty much everything. Now, sending Ulquiorra and Yami to the real world is rather interesting because he tells them to be wary of 3 individuals. These 3 turn out to be Isshin, Urahara, and Yoruichi. I originally thought years ago that the third might be Ichigo, though that makes no sense because they were sent there to scout and see his power, but they were warned about 3 separate others. Later on, during the Katakura Town War, where Isshin, Yoruichi, and Urahara all face off against Aizen, well, in the manga, it clearly shows us that these were the 3 aforementioned individuals that he was referring to. On top of this, Urahara even makes special anti-hero armor, as Yoruichi, just from hitting a weaker Yami, who was nowhere near as strong as he was later on, as Chad refers to him as being much stronger than when he first faced him, and Yami states that for him to perform a full release, he must store energy away for a while. Well, Yoruichi says she was surprised by how strong Yami was, and her body was damaged so much that Urahara made special armor specifically to combat this problem. In the past, when first seeing this battle between Yoruichi, Isshin, Urahara, and Aizen, you just assumed that they came prepared for Aizen with this armor. Though they had no idea he was going to transform like this or fuse with the Hogyoku, so it was in fact made as a response to how strong Yami and Ulquiorra were seen by them at the start of the arc. It's plausible to say that they just made this in general because they were like, whoa, the hero of those hollows was ridiculous. If we run into any more of these Espada, we need to come prepared. If you remember, during the original encounter with Yoruichi and Urahara versus Ulquiorra and Yami, Ulquiorra in his base form slapped away one of Urahara's attacks with one hand, and this attack was meant to kill Yami, after Yami tried to kill Yoruichi with a Sero at point blank range. The data books actually indicate that this would have killed her, and Ulquiorra isn't intimidated by Urahara or Yoruichi. This further shows us readers and watchers that Aizen, although he warned them about those potential three, he wasn't worried they'd just go out there and die on a scouting mission. It's very obvious he sent them out there because he thought that they would be able to handle themselves. Also, Yoruichi states to Urahara she thinks she should have used Shunko in this battle against Yami and Ulquiorra, something she had to use against an Aizen who wasn't even trying just to get a surprise attack to connect. It would actually be pretty cool if one of the data books would tell us what Shunko's multiplier is, because that form was one of the coolest things that was barely shown again in the series. Like, why did Soifon not really whip it out again? You know, just
against Aizen, like she didn't do anything.
Kaioken power for Yoruichi and Soifon, and they sort of barely use it. I know the instant knee-jerk reply to the Ishin, Urahara, and Yoruichi stuff is going to be, well, they fought Transcendent Aizen. What are you talking about? They're in a completely different league to Yami and Ulquiorra. The problem is that none of them could have even beaten Aizen in his Shikai/base in a one-on-one fight, let alone his Transcendent forms. As we know, he was messing around with them the entire time, and Aizen, while in his Shikai/base, was subjugating the Hogyoku and feeding it spiritual pressure of his own mid-battle. So everything that happened between
they weren't even fighting the 100% Aizen
during that fight. Aizen was also, in Urahara's words, fighting differently to how he usually does, and even with that being said, just because Ishin surprise flicked him doesn't mean Aizen was losing the fight.
No.
He was zipping around the battlefield and casually whipping out Kitos against Ishin like nothing anyway, and also he purposely stopped using his Shikai against all three of them. Like, how do people not see that he wasn't being serious in any of these battles, and was also fighting out of character, in Urahara's words? This is also further backed by the fact that when he has a 1v3 fight with all of them, he is able to one-shot all three of them when he stops messing around, and he does it very easily. The only three individuals Aizen had contingency plans for are Yamamoto, Kenpachi, and Ichigo. But with Ichigo, his plan is mostly about developing his powers because he knows the potential of the Vasto Lorde and wants to have a good battle with Ichigo, someone who is a hybrid of every major race in the series, on top of the comment Ichigo made to Urahara where he said Aizen actually wanted to lose the entire time. He said he could feel the loneliness from his blade. He felt someone who was cursed by being too strong and he wanted to be surpassed. All of this connects to the underlying subplot of Aizen having an interest in Ichigo's potential. I've seen many people bring up the idea that it's even possible.
Personally, I don't know how I feel about that in particular,
to not just test his powers.
I think Urahara may have known that there wasn't really any truth to that.
You'll know why, but it's very possible that the reason he destroyed the cleaner was because both he and Gin kept bringing up the idea that Ichigo has much more potential. Gin says in his fight with Ichigo something very particular, like he's expecting Ichigo to hurry up and get stronger because, you know, he's secretly hoping, okay, Ichigo might be the one that can take down Aizen, but Aizen is expecting him to get stronger because he wants that battle that he's craving. This is also shown when Aizen says he will return and devour Ichigo if he doesn't get strong enough, and he says to Gin that he's going to hang all of Ichigo's friends outside of...
And keep in mind, this helps back up the statement that I made that Aizen was never all that worried about Kenpachi. So remember how he said he knew about Kenpachi's potential and how he wanted to trap him in Deweka Mundo? If you thought that it was because he thought that Kenpachi could provide him with that, you know, that challenge, keep in mind, he thought that about Ichigo, but not Kenpachi. That's because he knew even though as strong as Kenpachi was, he wouldn't have been able to actually challenge him. It was more so just out of convenience, but he thought Ichigo, if he were to live up to his potential, would actually give him the challenge that he needed. Not Kenpachi and not even Yamamoto to an extent, but Ichigo. Think about that. Sorry, I'm not going to pause anymore, seriously, because
which will accelerate his
I can already tell this video is going to be too long.
Likely transform in some way. Now, it's very true that there's no way he could have predicted things like the Dongai form or the Mugetsu, right? As this has shown that he's quite surprised by the forms, and he actually doesn't even understand what's going on. Like, at first he thinks that he discarded his spiritual pressure, but that's not even the case. It turns out that he just can't sense Ichigo.
Yeah, he was on such a higher
much stronger than
plane,
him.
he
I
couldn't
think
even sense
realistically,
him.
if you go with the Dongai theory, where you do assume that he destroyed the cleaner on purpose to, you know, give Ichigo the ability to get stronger, he was expecting him to train in there, buff the form that he currently has, and by seeing the bodies of his fellow classmates and friends hung up around Katakura Town before he enters, this would either trigger the Vasto Lorde transformation, or the Vasto Lorde would be even stronger than the power he could sense in Ichigo's spiritual pressure. Interestingly, if you consider the Bleach movie Hellverse canon, this helps out a lot for Ulquiorra's scaling, as he is the one who actually fights the Vasto Lorde, can block Seros from it with his own Seros, and has techniques more powerful than those said Seros. Also, when all of the guys in Hell are watching Ichigo's battle to see if he's strong enough to potentially cut the chains of Hell, just from analyzing the battle with Ulquiorra, they believe that during that battle he was strong enough to potentially cut the chains of Hell. In the Bleach Hellverse movie, Yamamoto states that cutting the chains of Hell is something he considered impossible, meaning he doesn't believe that this is something he could do himself, and Ulquiorra, who was off guard, let me be clear with this, right? He literally says to the Vasto Lorde, straight to his face, right? He says, hey, finish me off at point blank with this Sero. I give up, you're stronger, it's all over, right? Ulquiorra, while not defending himself with his spiritual pressure, at point blank range, takes a Sero from the Vasto Lorde, survives it, and can regenerate everything except his inner organs. Which means that an Ulquiorra who isn't protecting himself with his spiritual pressure and was pretty much asking to be executed, has durability in the same ballpark as the Chains of Hell. And Yamamoto, who was someone Aizen was unsure if he could beat in a fight, and made an entire being with the Hogyoku with the sole purpose of sealing Yamamoto's Bankai to prevent this potential battle to the death, said he thought cutting them would be impossible.
Well,
even if you throw away all of my Hellverse scaling, right, and you don't consider the movie canon, which that's completely fine. If you don't consider Hellverse,
especially
canon,
considering the recent
that, right?
chapter,
I think that's fair. You know, that's fair.
I mean,
to say.
maybe
I personally think it's relevant just because of the statements made where Kubo says that the battle between the Vasto Lorde and Ulquiorra was actually how he envisioned the original one to be. So we're essentially getting the real version of that fight in the movie, where it's a lot more competitive, and again, it doesn't really change much except make Ulquiorra look even better. But even with that being said, it doesn't change too much about what I said, right? Aizen, in the main source of canon, which is the manga, believes the Vasto Lorde is a greater power, but talks in an extremely negative tone about the Espada in Katakura Town, and anticipates Ichigo's power in his potential battle with him in the future. I want to reiterate once more, Aizen even says he'll hang Ichigo's friends' dead bodies outside of Katakura Town to further develop these powers. That's how serious he is about Ichigo's potential powers that he never even seen fight, but knows defeated Ulquiorra. Another interesting thing to consider is that if Aizen created Ulquiorra's second release form, this means he planned for all of this to happen, and for Yami and Ulquiorra to be the secret strongest Espada, who were also given fake ranks. But if Aizen actually doesn't know about Ulquiorra's second release,
I don't think
which
that's the
Ulquiorra
case.
claims,
No,
this
I think
means
he knows.
that the form's multiplier could be way stronger than we, as readers and watchers, actually know. As when Uryu actually takes Orihime above the canopy of Los Noches, he actually says some stuff that's very specific when he gets closer and closer to Ulquiorra, who had just transformed into his second release. What? What is this? It's coming from above the canopy. What is this? Is it spiritual energy? It's so different. It's not like any spiritual energy I felt before. It's not that it's powerful or massive. It's alien. It's so thick and heavy it almost feels like something other than spiritual energy. It feels like there's an ocean above the sky. What is it? This is bad. This is a reaction which Uryu didn't have to anything else earlier in the story, especially in the Soul Society arc. And other characters make note of how thick the atmosphere feels, and then how it changes once Ulquiorra passes. Throughout the entire battle, they could feel this ocean of spiritual pressure, all from his second release. Further evidence that shows that Ulquiorra's powers are rather unique compared to the other Espada are actually the fact that, as I said earlier, his first release also seems insanely strong. Like, when he transforms into it, the difference in power between him and Ichigo is very considerable. And also, when he does transform, it rains spiritual pressure everywhere above the canopy of Los Noches. And the Skull Hollow Rudborn can actually sense that Ulquiorra has transformed, and he makes a very specific note of this being a big deal. Point being, if Ulquiorra's second release was made by Aizen, it was done for a reason, and he had further plans for him. He did say verbatim, and this was a narrative point, that he set up all of Ichigo's battles on purpose. And again, he says specifically that he did this to develop Ichigo's powers. He had expectations as to how strong Ichigo would become. And even if Ulquiorra wasn't left there to deal with Ichigo, he would have been left with Yami to help deal with some of the strongest captains in Hueco Mundo. One of which, again, Aizen wanted to fuse with the Hogyoku before fighting. And then once more, if Aizen doesn't know about this form, Ulquiorra's words, which imply he is planning to show it to Aizen, means it's strong enough to be impressive to him. Also, when Ichigo goes to Katakura Town after his battle with Ulquiorra and Yami, this would explain why even when he's just in Bankai, right, even Unohana is shocked at how strong he actually is, and for some reason Ichigo is able to sense Aizen now, which Ishin, Yoruichi, and Urahara cannot, which further shows that when Kubo draws these images here at the end of each chapter in relation to the Vasto Lorde transformation, that it's actually overpowering the badge. This transformation let Ichigo get considerably stronger to the point where even the badge couldn't contain it, and again, he's the only one that can sense Aizen. At the end of the day, the best scaling for Ulquiorra, which makes it incredibly difficult to put Stark above him, is that Ulquiorra directly revolves around Aizen's secondary goal of fighting Ichigo at his strongest. And he does fight the Vasto Lorde. Like, he fought a form that was so strong, it surpassed a deformed version of itself that was scaring Lisa to the point where she thought she was going to die against it. But against Resurrection Halibel, went in solo multiple times, sometimes while not even holified, and wasn't intimidated by her at all to the same degree. Listen, I don't want to keep banging this drum, but Ulquiorra directly scales to a character that far surpasses all of the Espada, and some people, for whatever reason, right, they act like they fell down a flight of stairs and lost their memory whenever this topic gets brought up. Like, do you all have Alzheimer's, bro? Like, Ulquiorra literally fought the Vasto Lorde and was able to block its attacks and was somewhat relative
Sort of.
Like, I don't know, like, am I insane? Like, because I feel like I am whenever I scale the Espada, and this just blows my mind. It's almost as bad as the Kakazu over pain arguments, or Noyatora can beat any Espada because of his hero.
Oh.
Anyway, as for Yami, he was left in Hueco Mundo, like Ulquiorra, wasn't summoned to go with Aizen, is secretly number 0, infinitely gets stronger with anger, is stated to have the highest spiritual pressure of all Espada in the data books, and fought Kenpachi and Byakuya at the same time. It's almost like Yami was perfectly designed for Kenpachi as he infinitely gets stronger, and Kenpachi has all of his hidden power that Aizen was worried about. Sadly for Yami, he had to fight Byakuya at the same time too, who had trained non-stop during the months after losing to Ichigo, and has speed that surpasses the quote-unquote fastest Sonido user, Zomari, which also debunks the idea that Yami is a slow character just because he is large. It's most likely that due to his low intelligence, this is why he is able to be exploited in battle. Plus, when he gets angry, he does like to spam ballas, which make him 20 times faster. Also, a lot of you may not remember this, but when Ulquiorra is showing all of those floating TV screen things to Orihime when they're in the Dongai, and he's saying, "I'm gonna kill all of your friends if you don't come with me," one of them actually contains Toshiro, and obviously this shouldn't be an issue, but he is not scared of Toshiro, like, at all. He blatantly implies, hey, if I wanted to, I could go and kill him, like, it wouldn't be a problem, and I don't doubt it. So there is one final little point I'd like to put the nail in the coffin for, and that is how much people exaggerate the idea of the quote-unquote amp statement from Uryu, where he says that Arrancar get a several times increase in power while in Hueco Mundo. Now, straight away, this is obviously false, as after this statement is made, it's never once ever mentioned again. And the only time there is any real specific mentions of the major differences when existing in the separate terrains of the real world Soul Society or Hueco Mundo, Yami just says he finds it harder to breathe. That's it. Ichigo and the captains never once say this might be a potential problem, nor do they say it during any battles in Hueco Mundo. Now, Uryu is a very intelligent character. I'd say he's one of the most intelligent characters in the series, especially when it comes to his age. But he isn't a Urahara or a Shikamaru type character. Chances are, either this was a plot point dropped by Kubo and maybe possibly forgotten, or Uryu is just a faulty narrator and made an incorrect analysis of the situation. Not only would this contradict many narrative elements, it's never mentioned post-Uryu. Now, some people may say, Clyde, but what about Chad? When he was in Hueco Mundo, he made a note that his powers feel like they're a little bit like, they're a bit more aggressive or more powerful, or they're starting to come out a bit more. Well, I actually believe that it's just the case that Hueco Mundo triggered his abilities more. That in itself is also a plot point which I believe Kubo dropped, because the idea of him having like the power of the devil or something like that, that would have been so damn cool. And then on top of that too, like Chad gets wasted later. We could have had a Hell arc by Kubo where he draws his own version of Satan. I mean, if you look at Ulquiorra's second release, it's got a very Satan-esque type aesthetic to it, right? Imagine how overpowered and cool he would have made Satan look. But anyway, to answer that point, an increase in power.
Well, hey, I mean, we're about to get that. At least I hope.
That even with his most powerful punch, which he said he was using to try and finish Ulquiorra in one blow, it didn't even do anything to his base form. So he's not a good indicator of a massive increase in power, considering he's actually not that strong. As it was stated, this high density of Reishi in Hueco Mundo basically just allows small hollows to exist purely from consuming the air, and they don't actually have to eat. Now, I know many people out there badly want this to be a real thing, so that characters like Hallibell, Baragun, and Stark casually just annihilate Yami and Ulquiorra with a single Sero. But sadly, this just isn't a thing.
No.
Again, it makes absolutely zero narrative
maybe
sense.
Hallibell in
and if
the
you want to, you could literally just argue
in the Thousand Year
that
Blood
if
War, because
Hallibell,
assuming she did
Baragun,
get stronger,
and Stark
so
went into Hueco
and of course there's
Mundo,
Grimmjow.
the difference in power between themselves and Ulquiorra and Yami in their second forms would still be so large that it wouldn't make a difference. One of the saddest parts about Stark's character is easily the pure fact that he didn't actually need to die. In fact, he didn't even need to fight at all in the story. And his end doesn't feel like there is any completeness to his character, nor justification for his sad end. The Hollow who started out all alone found camaraderie in a man who actually seen him as nothing but a tool. Stark, who was surrounded by those who only acted as a farce of a team due to a leader keeping them from ripping each other's heads off, and his only close friend vanishing from his life in a meaningless battle. In Stark's final moments, he realized he was fighting for what was essentially a lie. He never had any friends among the Espada. He never had Aizen as a true leader to show him that light at the end of the tunnel he sought after, or give him a place of purpose. He only had a veil across his eyes. Ironically, Shunsui, who wanted to sit and drink with Chad instead of fighting in the Soul Society arc, was for some stupid reason absolutely dead set on fighting Stark.
Yeah,
who
that
had no initial intention of hurting him.
that honestly is what didn't really make any sense
The
to me.
instant reply might be, but Clyde, they would have had to fight him regardless, as he did eventually become serious. Well, before this,
Well, no.
why not focus your efforts on having Shunsui go and take care of Hallibell with Toshiro, and Ukitake assist one of the other battles like the Baragun and Soifon fight? This would have led to a more clean sweep, and then Stark could be dealt with later, if he interfered with the Aizen ordeal. We may have even seen a moment in the story where we actually see Stark aim his gun at Aizen, as a way to revolt against him, when he realized that he did not care for any of them at all when they were falling. A character who was born into a world of solitude, left the world with nothing but himself. Coyote Stark, a character that is not only underappreciated in his battles, but underappreciated in his narrative impact. When I think of how he was introduced for such a brief amount of time, then exited the story in such a quick manner, his character in retrospect feels a sense of implicit loneliness. Coyote Stark, the Primera Espada.
Is it?
I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you could hit subscribe and leave a like on the video,
Because
that would mean a lot to me.
Video.
If you support my
there you
channel,
go.
I'll keep making videos like this, and especially when the anime returns.
Oof, that's gonna be a day.
Alright, so I'm sitting here, I'm sipping my coffee, and I was like,
Oh,
you know what? There's a couple of things that people are going to call me out on, and they're going to say, hey, you forgot about this, Clyde. So I made a little note to put at the end of this video. So basically, a couple of things real quick. Ishin doesn't say when he gets his powers back that he got stronger nor weaker. His powers just returned to him, so we would assume that he has at least the same strength as when he originally fought White back in the Everything But the Rain chapters. So Ulquiorra does in fact scale to the 3 that Aizen warned them about, regardless of any of the stuff that you may bring up. I know that Ishin was stronger than the White that he fought, but the problem is that Ulquiorra and the Vizards, they both fought 2 versions of White which were even stronger, because he is now fused with not just Ichigo, but he also is fused with his Shinigami powers and his Quincy powers. Plus he does evolve many times. Another thing is that a lot of Baragon fans are going to say, but what about Baragon? His Respira ability should be able to beat every Espada. We have a really big problem here. Gin does explicitly say that the reason that all the Espada followed Aizen wasn't because of his hypnosis, but it was actually because of how much stronger Aizen was than the Espada with just his power alone. Once again, confirmed by Gin, Aizen says to Soifon that higher spiritual pressure can negate people's abilities. Kenpachi says the same thing when he fights Ichigo, and in the novels it is confirmed that the Respira ability can be negated by higher spiritual pressure, so characters like Yami in his final form, Ulquiorra in his second release, and Stark would all be able to negate this ability. There is a headcanon theory that people have made up that say that the only reason Baragon is ranked number 2 is actually because Aizen doesn't like him, but there's never any tension between him and Stark, nor is that ever actually highlighted in the story, so that is a headcanon theory. All we can assume is that Stark would just genuinely beat Baragon with no problem because he has higher spiritual pressure. And the final thing, to all of the Stark fans that are going to say, oh, well, Stark would literally just whip out his Mach 10 Seto gun and just go brrr, and then just destroy Yami, because he's able to fire infinite Seros, which means that Yami wouldn't be able to do anything, and Ulquiorra would eventually get hit by one and he would get taken out, right? Well, yeah, this is kind of like what would happen. Alright, that's it. I'm going to finish this guy off. Let me whip out my Seto Matraleta. Oh, what the fuck?
oh boy. Yeah, so there it is. Wow, this was a long video. All right, so look, I'm just gonna end it right here because this, like I said, this video is already long enough as it is. But yeah, Coyote Stark, underrated character. Maybe not necessarily the strongest because of Ulquiorra and Yami, but to me personally, I still wish that he would have been utilized more. And I'm hoping that maybe in this current arc that's about to be shown, considering where they're going, maybe we will see him again. At least, my God, do I hope. Anyway, with that being said, guys, I hope you enjoyed the vid. I hope you check out my next reactions when they do come out. Remember to stay safe, take care of yourselves. Bye for now.